and welcome to another episode of Second Gen's Liberated Panda. My name is Angel and I'm joined here by my co-host Victor Chen, who will be helping us with the Chinese translation of this video because I think this is a very important topic.
欢迎来到第二代的新一期视频。那么今天是由 Angel 唐和我来帮忙翻译。
So today we are joined here by our very special guest. Her name is Alisa Hartsell from the Texas State University, and she's currently an adjunct professor and a doctoral candidate researching defensive asylum seeking in the United States in connection with Chinese political asylum seekers.
今天我们特殊的嘉宾是来自德克萨斯州大学的一名教授 Alisa Hartsell.
Hello, Lisa. 你好。
How are you? Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you.
Thank you for coming on our show today, Alisa. So would you please tell us a little bit about your background, what motivated you to study this topic of political asylum, specifically as it pertains to Chinese people?
那么首先能请您稍微介绍一下您自己的背景，然后同时为什么是什么促使了您想要学习政治避难？
Of course. So I actually came into the topic in the opposite direction. My undergraduate research is in East Asian civilization, Chinese history, and I ended up in a course for my senior seminar in history, trying to better understand South Texas. And what ended up happening was I researched the Pershing Chinese community. These
I'm sorry. Alisa 的背景呢，她在大学时候的本科学习的是关于东亚学习以及中国历史。那么在最后一年的学习中，她学习到了关于政治避难和南德克萨斯州之间的关系。
The Pershing Chinese were the first group of Chinese and only group to receive asylum during the exclusionary period. Not the same type of asylum that we see today. It was very specially made through a public resolution. But I had the opportunity for my master's degree to go and do oral histories with the children of the Pershing Chinese community and understand their life growing up in San Antonio, Texas.
那么他所学习的是第一批获得政治避难的中国人，在当时的背景是一个他们受到排挤的时代。那么在他的硕士学习期间 Alisa 学习到了世界历史以及第一批受到政治避难的中国人他们的孩子的生活是如何的。
From that, after I graduated, I took a little bit of a break, but continued to think and research about how these Chinese migrants actually ended up in northern Mexico before entering in and living in San Antonio, Texas. That's actually how I shifted from history into currently I'm working on geography and understanding the asylum system through geography.
在毕业之后呢 Alisa 学习到了这一批中国受到政治避难的人士，他们是如何从北墨西哥移民到圣安东尼奥的。那么现在他所研究的方向是关于地理和政治避难之间的联系。
Chinese asylum seekers are the largest nationality group in both the affirmative and defensive asylum processes, which we can get into. They make up about 3% of the estimated unauthorized or undocumented population, which is comparable to Hondurans, which we think about these groups from Central America as being very large.
Right.
那么寻求政治避难的中国人士是在所有人里面占有最多的人口的。那么其中有 3% 是没有合法居住许可的。这个数据和来自洪都拉斯的人是一样的。
Yeah. So the biggest comparison point obviously being that unlike the individuals coming from the Northern Triangle in Mexico, Chinese asylum seekers not only one of the largest groups seeking affirmatively and defensively, they're also much more successful than many other groups.
Yeah, so I find that really surprising, but I'll let Victor translate that first.
那么寻求政治避难的中国人士不仅仅是其他人里面最多的， 而且在得到政治避难的几率中，他们是最成功的那一批人。
So that's basically what Alisa's research is about. It's about why the Chinese the community is able to obtain political asylum at such a higher rate than other ethnicities. So that is what she's focused on. On top of that, she's also, she has the resources, she has the step-by-step for anyone in our audience looking to obtain political asylum in the Chinese community. So that's what we're here for today as well.
Yeah, let me start off by talking through the affirmative process because that one has a lot less steps involved.
Oh, yeah. So how do I begin the process of obtaining political asylum as a Chinese person in America?
那么我们就一步一步的来学习作为一个中国人如何获得政治避难。
So in the affirmative process, you arrive in the United States through any sort of legal means. This could be just a traveling visa. This could be, you might already be in the United States under some sort of temporary status, such as an H-1B or a student visa. And you have the well-founded fear that if you return to China or to your home country, you will be persecuted.
Right.
那么首先呢，你要实际的到达美国。那么无论你是合法的或者不合法的，拥有一个在美国居留或者停留的许可，你都可以申请政治避难。然后你要确保的是，你在回国之后会受到迫害。
So when you decide that it's best to seek asylum to gain a little bit more permanent status in the United States, first you really want to seek out a competent immigration attorney, honestly. Mm-hmm. Then you are going to go through the process of applying for asylum or withholding of removal. This is an I-539 form. Where you tell your story. What is your well-founded fear of persecution? And this should be based on the 5 key factors for any refugee: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion.
那么当你到达美国之后，你需要申请一个 I-589表格来申请你的政治避难。那么你需要符合的呢，是你要是一个难民。那么难民的5个条件分别有种族、国籍、你的政治意见，can't really think of. Can you repeat the 5? Can you repeat the 5 of them? I only got 3 of them.
Race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion.
Political opinion. 好那么成为难民的5个条件呢，分别是种族、宗教、你的国籍、你的在政党中的一个角色，还有你的政治意见。
So for an example, Lisa, like a social group would be like if you were a homosexual, for instance, you would be part of a persecuted group, right? Correct?
Yes, exactly.
那么按照刚刚说的呢，是如果你是你的性取向跟别人的不一样，或者说你是LGBTQ 团体当中的一员，那么在你回国之后，你会受到迫害，也可以成为你作为难民的条件。
So in your experience, Alisa, what is the strongest case that you see where people are more successfully getting political asylum?
They're going to have...
sorry. Alisa, 那么对于你来说，你觉得想要获得政治避难，那么你所见过的最有力的一个证据是什么？
Right. An individual is going to have more success if they have a competent immigration attorney on their side. That means that they have the opportunity to prepare because in the interview with an asylum officer or in front of the immigration judge, the burden of proof is on the petitioner. Mm-hmm. You're going to want to have all of your documentation in order. You're going to have a very clear narrative of events for the reasons that you have your well-founded fear of persecution, and then you're going to be able to have other evidence as well. It typically really helps out.
那么 Alisa 刚刚说的呢，是如果你有一个律师的帮助，可以帮你获得更好的面试，帮你更加完善的去准备你的文件、你的证据，还有你的声明，那么你在申请政治避难这个事情上会有更大的成功率。
Yes, and I have a caveat to that. So I cannot stress this enough. In the the Chinese community here in New York, at least, there's a lot of scams. There's a lot of people claiming to be able to get you political asylum, but really you're spending $50,000, $100,000, and you're not getting the results, and they are guaranteeing it. And that's why I wanted to speak with an expert like Alisa here, because she knows all too well these scams that occur and kind of direct us towards the proper resources. Do you happen to have a database of reputable immigration lawyers? And if you don't, that's okay, because I happen to have some that I know of.
Yeah. So the best first source to go to.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry. 那么按照刚刚讲的呢，就是说，或者说仅在纽约这个地区有很多的诈骗事件，那么可能就有声称是移民律师的人，他会保证你取得政治避难，那么你会花很多的钱去。不一定拿到这样的一个身份，那么他想问 Alisa 就是说，那 Alisa 有没有认识一些很出名的、很有信誉的移民律师可以做到这样的事情？
So the best and first resource to go to for anyone is the Executive Office for Immigration Review. They have a website set up. Unfortunately, right now it's only in English and Spanish, but they do have a list of competent immigration lawyers that are accredited with the Executive Office of Immigration Review. They also have a pro bono list. So if you are limited on resources, funding, that's probably the best place to start.
那么 Alisa 推荐的呢是去 Executive Office of Immigration of Review, right? Immigration Review. 那么就应该是一个官方移民以及对你的文件判定的这样的一个机构。那么当你缺少一些资源或者是缺少金钱来完成这个申请的时候，你可以去寻求帮助。
还有免费的。Right. So we can provide all the information to all of that in the description of this interview, so people have access to it.
那么所需要的信息呢，我们会在这一期视频的介绍里面放在那里。
So if you don't have anything else to add to that, I'm going to just keep going through our other questions.
So let me get to the defensive side of things.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Because there is actually, affirmative is the process you want. You want to arrive in the U.S. with some sort of legal status and go through, fill out your forms, have your interview with a USCIS, U.S. Customs and Immigration Services officer. This is asylum, an asylum officer. The defensive is not the process. Unfortunately, it's a lot of people's process, but it's not a fun process.
那么 Alisa 想要强调呢，是你首先要入境美国，在提交表格之后呢，你会取得一个面试的机会，你会和一个检查你难民身份的政治避难官员来和他去做一个面试，把你的申请、把你的理由都要告诉他。
So in the defensive process, if you either arrive illegally or if your affirmative process fails and you're denied asylum through the affirmative process, you'll receive a notice to appear in immigration court. The setting is completely different. This is a courtroom. You have to plead your case against a judge and again, against a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, or USCIS lawyer. When you're not guaranteed a lawyer.
I see.
那么当你在这一个辩护过程中没有进行那么顺利的时候呢，你会被送到移民法庭。那么在那里呢，你将要面对的是 国土安全部门，以及如果你没有一个律师的话，你会面对一个他们的律师来向他们去证明你自己需要政治避难的一个身份。
In the worst case scenario, you may only have a few minutes to plead your case before a decision is passed down by an immigration judge because the case backlog in the immigration courts is over 1 million.
It's insane. I believe it's 3 to 4 years long, correct? The backlog?
Yeah.
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 那么在最坏的一种情况下呢，你仅仅只有几分钟的时间在那个移民法庭上去申诉，或者说向他们证明你自己在自身的一个情况。
And also from my understanding, Alisa, the statistics for if you do not have a lawyer representing you, I believe the statistic is your chance of success of obtaining political asylum is only 4% or something like that, correct?
It's a little better. Sorry.
I'm sorry. 按照刚刚说的呢，是那么据说，如果你没有一个好的移民律师帮助的话，那么你取得政治避难的几率只有4%。那么是这样的吗？
It can be a little bit better than that. Unrepresented asylum cases between 2000 and 2019, about 17%. For successful represented cases, you can get up to 47% success rate.
Okay, so you're much better off with representation. So,
那么 Alisa 刚刚说的呢是，即使你没有一个移民律师，你取得政治避难几率也不会有那么的不堪。那么在2019年呢，没有一个律师取得政治避难的几率大概在17%，但是在有的情况下呢是47%。即使它没有那么不堪的一个成功率，但是如果你有移民律师的话，还是会很大的增加你获得政治避难的几率。
I think the important thing to remember here is that the burden of proof, including your testimony, any evidence that you can show and bring along with you, will continue to increase your opportunities and your possibilities to receive asylum or other forms of asylum relief in the U.S.
Interesting. Okay. So are there other further steps that we would have to take once you get past that?
No. In the affirmative process, it is a form, interview with USCIS officer, and then they make a decision. Obviously, while you're waiting for that decision, you will probably want to apply for an EAD, which is a work permit. And fortunately, the defensive system, it depends on if you can bond out or not, because they can hold you indefinitely.
Oh, I see. Wow. Okay, goodness.
那么像刚刚说到的一样，所以你只需要入境、提交表格、获得面试、去申请面试，然后以及去真正的和一个官员面谈。那么在那个过程之后呢，你只需要等待你的政治避难结果。那么在这期间呢，你可以去申请一个叫做 EAD 的工作许可，但是在这份申请的过程中可能会有更多的障碍，所以还是一份非常艰难的过程。
I see.
Let me add one thing for the affirmative process currently. We, at the end of the Trump administration, they switched from a first in, first out to a last in, first out process, meaning that some people who are still waiting on an asylum interview have put into sort of a forever backlog. So a lot of immigration attorneys are really struggling with letting people who are here, who have completed the forms, who are just waiting for that interview. We don't know how long that they have to wait, unfortunately. If you've come in more recently, you might actually have your decision quicker.
So
Yeah, I was going to say. And they're mostly people who have applied before 2018, right?
Yes.
那么现在我们面对的一个很大的困难呢，是在政治的改革之后，现在对于政治避难的政策变为了，你后申请，但是你先获得结果。那么就代表了在2018年之前申请的有很多人， 他们在提交了表格之后，迟迟拿不到他们的面试通知，而这些后来申请的，可能有更多的机会，在更短的时间内得知他们的面试时间以及地点，以及获得去面试的这个机会。
So, Alisa, as a follow-up question, it seems to me like it's actually, it might even be advantageous to somebody who wants to stay in America. And it's actually advantageous for them to have this excruciatingly long waiting period because at least they're safe in America, right? So
They are.
Right? So during the time that they're applying for this process, in the 5 years, they do have legal status here, correct?
那么 Andrew 刚刚问到的问题就是说，即使这是一个非常非常繁琐，而且不知道未知结果的过程，但是在这停留美国的期间，申请政治避难期间内，这些人是拥有合法居留许可的，是这样吗？
So the problem that we're seeing there, yes, they're safe. They're in the United States. They are not, if they've put in their form and application properly, they're unlikely to go into removal proceedings. However, if their family is still abroad, any derivatives of your asylum application may be stuck overseas for that period too.
Okay. And can you elaborate on that? And then, sorry, Victor, you go ahead.
Alisa 刚刚说的呢，就是在申请政治避难这段期间内，在美国的人，这个申请人他会保证的是一个安全的生活，但是而且他有很小的几率会被遣送出境，但是这个申请人的家人可能还在海外在遭受着迫害。
Right. When you complete your asylum application and you're given a decision, if there are derivatives, individuals listed in your petition, in your forms, your parents potentially, or your children, close family members who have also experienced the same persecution that you have, the U.S. Can, of course, flag these people for bring them over and give them legal status, give them asylum as well. When you're waiting at this extended period of time, there's just no guarantee of when they could receive this status. The other issue is they do have to be able to access a U.S. consulate or U.S. embassy to get the proper visas to arrive legally as well.
I see.
那么Alisa 刚刚又重点提出了一点呢，是当你在申请这个过程上交了你的表格之后，或者当最后你得到了你的政治避难身份，那么美国可以引进你在海外的家人，但是当你在申请的这份过程中，他们的生活还是居无定所的。而且需要注意的一点是，当这些家人从海外被引进美国的时候，他们还需要他们还需要可以接触到美国大使馆，并且成功的进入美国。
So Alisa, as a Chinese asylum speaker, you kind of touched upon this because you kept distinguishing between someone entering legally and someone entering illegally. So I just want to ask you, how does the political asylum process treat somebody, a Chinese person seeking political asylum, who's entered illegally versus legally? Like, how different is that process?
Andrew 刚刚提出的问题呢，就是说你获得政治避难身份的几率是否和你非法入境或者说合法入境有关呢？
The affirmative process is entering legally. The defensive process, where you're having to defend yourself from being removed, deported, is that illegal process. That's where you end up in front of an immigration judge. It's very not only overwhelming because you probably have a legitimate reason, well-founded fear of persecution, but it's a lot harder to get that lawyer. It's a lot harder to get any of the evidence that you would want to really build your claim.
Okay.
In the defensive process, if you enter illegally.
那么 Alisa 刚刚解释的是呢，如果你是拥有一个合法入境以及拥有居留许可的人呢，那么你所经历的一个申请政治避难的身份， 你是属于一个正向的证明自己作为一个难民的身份。但是如果你是非法入境，那么你就有可能被送到移民法庭，去那里申诉自己，而你在整个申诉的过程中，你是处于一个为自己辩护的这样的一个处境。所以说相对来讲它的难度可能会是不一样的。
And as a follow-up to that, if you enter legally, but you become illegal and do you have a grace period as to when you can apply before you're put on the defensive, where you can still be on the offensive, where it's easier?
那么 Angel 紧跟着问出的一个问题呢，就是说，当你是一个非法入境的身份，那你申请政治避难这样一个过程，会不会给你更多的一个时间让你留在美国呢？
Seeking asylum in the US, regardless of how you arrived, if you get in on a travel visa that's only, I believe, 90 days, you're over that 90 days, you actually have a year within that arrival date to apply for asylum.
I see. Okay.
那么 Alisa 的解释呢，是无论你合法或者非法入境，在你90天的居留期结束之后，你都有1年的时间来申请你的政治避难身份。